happens when the man who made the world sing Sweet Caroline can no longer strum a single note? At the height of his fame, Neil Diamond was untouchable, a legend who sold 125 million albums and filled stadiums with his voice. But behind the spotlight, a devastating truth was waiting. His hands began to tremble. The chords that once flowed effortlessly now slipped away. At 77, doctors gave him the news that shattered his world. For 2 long years, he kept it secret, refusing to believe it, refusing to stop. And then one night, he canceled everything. The tours, the appearances, the dream. Now, the man once called a music god spends his days quietly in his studio, far from the roaring crowds. His life today is a haunting contrast to the glittering glory of his past. Neil Leslie Diamond was born on January 24, 1941, in Brooklyn, New York, in the shadow of World War II. His parents, Rose and Akiba Diamond, were Jewish immigrants from Russia and Poland, chasing hope through hardship. His father sold dry goods, moving the family from place to place, always searching for stability. Amid the noise of Brooklyn's working-class life, young Neil absorbed the rhythm of struggle, the heartbeat that would one day pulse through his music. When his father joined the army, the family relocated to Cheyenne, Wyoming, a world away from city streets. There, under vast skies and flickering movie screens, Neil found his calling. Watching singing cowboys in dusty theaters, he discovered that songs could tell stories, stories of love, loss, and longing. When the war ended, the Diamonds returned to Brooklyn Beach, but something inside Neil had already changed forever. The boy from Brooklyn had found his voice, and it would soon echo around the world. He wasn't born with the guitar in his hand, but it didn't take long for Neil Diamond to find one. Before the spotlight, before the sold-out arenas, he was just a restless Brooklyn kid with too many thoughts and nowhere to put them. Then, at 15, he wrote a song for a girl he liked, a small gesture that would end up changing his entire life. Hear Them Bells wasn't just a teenage crush put to paper, it was the spark that lit a fire inside him. That same summer, fate stepped in. At a camp for Jewish kids upstate, Neil watched Pete Seeger perform. Just one man, one guitar, and a crowd completely spellbound. It was like watching magic happen in real time. Neil later said it hit him like a lightning bolt. By the time he got back home, he couldn't think of anything else. He begged for a guitar, and when he finally got one, a cheap $9 acoustic for his 17th birthday, it didn't matter how rough it sounded. To Neil, it was gold. School began to fade into the background. His notebooks filled with lyrics instead of class notes. His fingers were blistered, his grades slipping, but he didn't care. The songs wouldn't stop coming. That guitar became an extension of him, the first clue that maybe he wasn't meant to live an ordinary life. At Erasmus Hall High School, he sang in the chorus beside another dreamer, Barbra Streisand. 2 teenagers, not yet legends, just kids chasing a feeling they couldn't explain. They barely knew each other, but both carried something rare, a quiet intensity that the world would one day recognize. When Neil transferred to Abraham Lincoln High, his life took another twist. He picked up fencing. Strange combination, right? Music and swordplay? But fencing taught him the same things songwriting did: focus, rhythm, precision. He became good enough to win a fencing scholarship to University de New York in 1958. The irony? The scholarship was for fencing, but his heart was already somewhere else, strumming, scribbling, dreaming of songs that would one day make the whole world sing. He was supposed to wear a white coat, not chase a dream with a guitar. Neil Diamond once sat in crowded biology lectures, memorizing anatomy terms, but his heart was somewhere else entirely. While his classmates studied bones and organs, Neil was scribbling song lyrics in the margins of his notebook. Music kept calling, louder than any professor's voice. By his second year, he was skipping labs to sneak into Tin Pan Alley, that legendary stretch of New York where songwriters hustled for miracles. His grades tanked, but his dreams took flight. Then came 1961, the moment everything changed. Just 10 credits from becoming a doctor, Neil got an offer $50 a week to write songs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Enough to make the biggest gamble of his life. He dropped out, just like that, walked away from stability, from his parents' American dream to chase something nobody could see but him. His father was devastated, his mother heartbroken. It would take years and a mountain of hits before they could forgive the risk he took.
At Sunbeam Music Publishing, Neil got his first taste of the industry. The dream quickly lost its shine. He was trapped in a tiny writing room, expected to churn out bubblegum hits for singers he didn't even know. Every time he wrote something personal, something honest, it got rejected for being too complicated. When Sunbeam finally dropped him, Neil was crushed, but free. The failure taught him something vital. He couldn't fake it. He'd either do it his way or not at all. So he started again. In 1962, Neil teamed up with his old friend Jack Packer, forming Neil and Jack. They released a few songs, none of which made a dent. But even then, somewhere in the quiet disappointment, Neil Diamond was sharpening his voice, his truth, and his sound, the kind that would one day echo across the world. He'd finally gotten what every struggling songwriter dreams of, a solo record deal. But Neil Diamond's big break turned out to be a brutal heartbreak in disguise. In 1963, his debut single, Clown Town, hit the shelves under Columbia Records. The reviews were promising, the melodies were catchy, but the record flopped. It didn't just miss the charts, it disappeared without a trace. And Columbia wasted no time. They dropped him like yesterday's news. Suddenly, the rising star was flat broke. Some days, Neil had just 35 cents in his pocket, barely enough for a sandwich. He slept little, ate less, and wrote everywhere he could, on buses, in empty rooms, even on a dusty piano above a smoky New York club called Birdland. The city was loud, but inside him, a quiet storm was brewing. In that loneliness, something shifted. Without the noise of success or the pressure to please anyone, Neil's music started to sound like him. He later said it was in those dark, hungry years that he found his truth. That's when songs like Cherry Cherry and Solitary Man began to take shape. Then came 1965, the year everything changed. A pop group called Jay and the Americans recorded his song Sunday and Me, and for the first time, Neil had a hit. Number 18 on the Billboard charts, weeks of radio play, a taste of the dream he'd been starving for. That one song opened doors that had always been slammed in his face. It proved he wasn't just another songwriter lost in the crowd. His music had heart, and his hooks had staying power. Soon, he met hitmakers Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich, legends in the business. They believed in him instantly, got him a publishing deal. And then, just as fast, he got fired again. But Neil didn't quit. He couldn't. That fire was still burning. Barry and Greenwich introduced him to Burt Burns, head of Bang Records. Burns saw what Columbia didn't, the grit behind the grin, the raw emotion behind the melody. This time, Neil wasn't just signing another deal. He was stepping into the chapter that would make him Neil Diamond. What if the song that made someone else a superstar was actually the one that launched your own legend? That's exactly what happened to Neil Diamond. For years, he'd been writing in the shadows, pouring out dark, emotional songs that no one seemed to want. But when he finally got the freedom to make the kind of music he truly felt, everything changed. Then came the call that would rewrite his life. In 1966, a music publisher named Don Kirshner summoned Neil to his office. He needed a song for a brand new TV band called The Monkees. Neil hesitated, then played a tune he'd written for himself, "I'm a Believer." The moment Kirshner heard it, he knew it was gold. The track was rushed to California. The Monkees laid down their vocals, and when it hit the airwaves, boom! It wasn't just a hit, it was an explosion. "I'm a Believer" sold over 1 million copies before it even reached stores, shot to #1, and stayed there for 7 straight weeks. It became the biggest song of 1967. Overnight, Neil Diamond went from a struggling songwriter to the man behind the biggest hit in America. He followed it up with more Monkees hits, "A Little Bit Me," "A Little Bit You," and "Look Out, Here Comes Tomorrow," cementing his reputation as a hitmaker. But while the world was singing someone else's words, Neil hadn't forgotten his own voice. In early 1966, he released "Solitary Man," a haunting song about loneliness and love, a mirror of his own struggles. It wasn't a #1 smash, but it was raw, honest, and unforgettable. It announced that Neil Diamond had something real to say. Then came "Cherry Cherry." This time, it soared, climbing to #6 and proving he wasn't just another songwriter for hire. He was becoming a star in his own right. By the time his debut album, The Feel of Neil Diamond, dropped, one thing was clear. The man who wrote hits for others was now stepping into the spotlight himself. What happens when a quiet Brooklyn songwriter suddenly captures the heart of an entire nation, live on television? That's exactly what happened the night Neil Diamond walked onto The Ed Sullivan Show in 1969. America didn't just see a performer, they saw a star being born. He sat on a plain wooden stool. No fireworks, no fancy backdrop, just his voice and the song "Sweet Caroline." In those few minutes, something magical happened. Millions were pulled into his world, swaying to a tune that felt personal, warm, and timeless. When he returned to the show for Holly Holy, the transformation was stunning. A rainbow-colored pyramid, swirling lights, and flower children dancing in sync. It was the late 60s in all its bold, kaleidoscopic glory. "Sweet Caroline" exploded onto the charts, cementing Diamond's place among music's greats. Holly Holy followed, echoing his growing power as a storyteller. Oddly enough, those 2 songs would mark his only appearances on Sullivan, just as the legendary show itself was nearing its end. But the real story behind "Sweet Caroline"? That stayed a mystery for almost 4 decades. In 2007, Diamond finally shared the truth. It wasn't written for a lover at all, but inspired by a photo of a young Caroline Kennedy standing beside her pony. Back then, he was a broke songwriter grasping for hope, and that innocent image sparked something pure inside him. He wrote the song in less than an hour, tucked away in a Memphis hotel room. Years later, he performed it for Caroline herself at her 50th birthday, and suddenly, that melody carried even more magic. Over time, "Sweet Caroline" took on a life of its own. From weddings to stadiums, from generations of fans to the Boston Red Sox who made it their anthem, the song refused to fade. It became part of American DNA. By 1968, Neil's move to Uni Records had already begun reshaping his career. Columbia had once dropped him cold, but Uni gave him freedom, the kind of creative space where his soul could finally breathe. His first gold records arrived soon after, and for the first time, the world saw him not just as a hitmaker, but as a true performer. He even helped spotlight another rising legend. When a young Elton John landed in America, it was Neil Diamond who introduced him to his first big U.S. audience. As the years rolled on, Neil's concerts grew larger, his lyrics more personal, his voice deeper with emotion. The shy songwriter who once scribbled lyrics alone in his room had become something far greater. A showman who could command an arena and make every person in it feel like he was singing just for them. What happens when a struggling songwriter who once slept on buses suddenly becomes the biggest name in music? For Neil Diamond, 1970 wasn't just another year.
It was the explosion he'd been waiting for. His song Cracklin' Rosie hit #1, and overnight, the man who once wrote heartbreak anthems in empty rooms became a superstar. It was the payoff for every lonely night, every flop single, every ounce of hope he'd poured into songs like Solitary Man. Cracklin' Rosie had it all, a melody that stuck, lyrics that hit deep, and a sound that made people feel something. From that moment, Neil wasn't just writing hits for others, he was the hit. The momentum was unstoppable. 2 years later, Song Sung Blue topped the charts, proving his magic wasn't luck, it was mastery. Then came the night that changed everything. In the summer of '72, Diamond recorded Hot August Night at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, a 10-night sold-out run that turned into one of the greatest live albums in history. The passion, the power, the roar of the crowd. It wasn't just music, it was transformation. That night, Neil Diamond didn't just perform, he became a legend. Years later, he'd revisit that magic in sequels, 1987, 2009, 2018, but nothing ever matched the fire of that first show. Still, Diamond wasn't done taking risks. That same year, he did the unthinkable, headlining Broadway's Winter Garden Theater for 20 straight sold-out nights. Businessmen, old ladies, hipsters, young lovers, everyone came, and they all left as believers. At the height of his fame, just when the world wanted more, Diamond walked away. No tours, no lights, just family, reflection, and songwriting. For 3 years, the stage stayed silent. But when he finally returned in 1976, the world showed up, louder and larger than ever. His comeback tour broke attendance records and earned over $5 million, proving that true connection doesn't fade, it deepens. And for Neil Diamond, the best was still ahead. What happens when America's biggest songwriter suddenly bets everything on a seagull and then decides to become a movie star? In 1973, Neil Diamond signed a record deal that shocked the entire music industry. $5 million for 5 albums. No one had ever seen a number like that. It wasn't just a deal, it was freedom. And Neil used that freedom to take a massive creative leap. Instead of chasing another radio hit, he wrote the soundtrack for Jonathan Livingston's Seagull, a strange, poetic movie about a bird that dreamed of flying higher than the rest. The movie bombed, but Diamond's music, it soared. The soundtrack earned millions, won a Grammy, and even brought him a Golden Globe. Still, behind the gold and applause, Neil was furious. The film's director had edited his music without permission, cutting into his art. Diamond swore that day he'd never work on another movie unless he had total control. He kept that promise until 1980. That's when he made another bold move. Neil Diamond, the man who'd never acted a day in his life, signed on to star in The Jazz Singer. Hollywood paid him an incredible $3.5 million, making him the highest-paid first-time actor in history. Playing Yusel Rabinovich, a Jewish cantor chasing pop star dreams, Diamond shared the screen with legends like Laurence Olivier and Lucy Arnaz. The critics tore it apart, but audiences didn't care. The movie tripled its budget, and the soundtrack exploded with hits. Love on the Rocks, Hello Again, America. Even a controversial blackface scene couldn't overshadow the success. By the end, Neil had proven something powerful. He could try anything and still come out on top. But after that whirlwind, he made one final decision. He'd stick to the music, because that's where his soul truly lived. After his brief appearances playing himself in films like Saving Silverman, Neil Diamond quietly walked away from acting for good. But in music, he was still reaching higher. One song from the Jazz Singer soundtrack would outlive the movie itself, America. It wasn't just another chart hit, it was an anthem. Diamond poured his soul into it, drawing from his own family's immigrant roots. His grandparents had fled Russia and Poland to start over in Brooklyn, and the song was his tribute to them. "It's my gift to them," he once said. You could hear the ache in his voice, the mix of hope and heartbreak. That honesty made it universal. The song hit number 8 on the Billboard charts and never really left America's heart. Decades later, it found new life, blaring from speakers at Latino immigration rallies across the country. "It's a song for the modern-day Latino, too," Diamond said, proudly, amazed at how far his music had traveled. But behind the spotlight, his own life was far from perfect. At 23, waiting tables in the Catskills to fund his dream, he met a young woman named Jay Posner. They married in 1963, long before fame found him. She was a school teacher. He was a struggling songwriter. Together, they had 2 daughters, Marjorie and Ellen. Then came success, and with it, distance. By 1967, they had separated. 2 years later, it was over. As his songs climbed the charts, his family life crumbled. That same year, Neil found love again with Marcia Murphy, a TV production assistant. Rumors swirled that their romance began before his first marriage ended, but they built a life together anyway, raising 2 sons, Jesse and Micah. For a time, he seemed grounded until the road called louder than home. After 25 years, it ended. In 1995, their divorce made headlines, especially when reports claimed Marcia walked away with $150 million, half of Neil's fortune. He brushed it off with grace. "She got enough to live on for the rest of her life," he said, smiling softly, "and she was worth every penny." When life broke his heart, Neil Diamond didn't call a therapist, he called his guitar. Out of pain came Tennessee Moon, an album that became his form of healing, every lyric soaked in honesty. Then, in 1996, fate stepped in again. While touring in Australia, he met a woman named Ray Farrelly in Brisbane, and something unexpected sparked. Their connection was quiet but deep, lasting 12 years. Ray even managed his merchandising business, becoming part of both his heart and his work. But love isn't always easy, even for legends. When Ray's back surgery went wrong, the pain nearly destroyed her. Diamond stayed by her side through it all, writing the hauntingly beautiful songs of Home Before Dark during that difficult time. The album carried all the love, sadness, and devotion of those long nights together. Still, despite everything they endured, the relationship ended quietly before 2008, with no public reason, just silence. Then, when Neil thought his love story was done, life surprised him once more. In 2009, while filming a concert documentary, he met Katie McNeil, a sharp, much younger music executive. The nearly 30-year age gap didn't matter. "Love doesn't count the years," he later said. In 2011, at 70 years old, Neil announced his engagement in the most modern way possible, his very first tweet. The next year, they were married in an intimate Los Angeles ceremony. After years of heartbreak, he finally found peace. "I didn't want to end my life alone," Neil confessed. Katie not only became his partner, but also his manager, standing by him through his toughest chapter, his 2018 Parkinson's diagnosis, which ended his touring career after 5 decades on the road. Yet, even as life forced him to slow down, his artistry roared back to life. In 2005, before all this, he had joined forces with legendary producer Rick Rubin to create 12 songs, a stripped-down, deeply personal album that stunned critics by debuting at number 4 on the Billboard charts. Rubin challenged him to dig deep, play his guitar again, and forget the polish. The result?
Neil Diamond, raw and real, just like the man behind the music.
It's almost poetic. Some of the final studio moments of the legendary Billy Preston were captured during Neil Diamond sessions. Those recordings weren't just successful, they reignited something inside Diamond. On stage again, he sang with the same fire that had once made him a household name. But then came a twist no one saw coming. A song he'd written years earlier suddenly exploded across the world. Red, Red Wine. Only this time, it wasn't Neil singing it. UB40 had transformed his soft ballad into a smooth reggae anthem. The funny part? They had no idea Diamond wasn't a Jamaican songwriter. Their version topped charts in the UK in 1983, and then 5 years later, it hit #1 in the US. Diamond didn't just approve, he embraced it. He started performing their reggae version on stage, smiling as fans swayed to the beat. His music, it seemed, had found a new life of its own. And that was only the beginning. Quentin Tarantino used a haunting remake of Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon in Pulp Fiction, introducing a whole new generation to his songwriting. Deep Purple turned Kentucky Woman into a rock storm. Johnny Cash stripped Solitary Man to its raw emotional core. By 2009, artists like Adele, Coldplay, and Foo Fighters were honoring him, proof that Neil Diamond songs could cross genres, decades, and hearts. The awards followed, of course. The Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1984, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2011. But numbers, even 125 million albums sold, couldn't measure what really mattered. His true success lived in the voices of fans still singing along, generation after generation, to songs that refused to fade. He wasn't just a star, he was the soundtrack of people's lives. But in January 2018, just days before his 77th birthday, Neil Diamond's voice fell silent in the most heartbreaking way. Out of nowhere, he announced that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and was retiring from touring. Fans were stunned. One moment he was lighting up arenas on his 50th anniversary tour, the next, he was saying goodbye. The news hit hard. Neil had shows lined up in Australia and New Zealand, but Parkinson's, with its tremors and balance struggles, made it impossible for him to perform the way he always had, with fire, power, and grace. In his message to fans, he admitted his deep disappointment, but made a promise. He'd keep writing, keep recording, keep creating. And in true Neil fashion, he signed off with a line from his biggest hit. "This ride has been so good, so good, so good. Thanks to you." The music world stood still. Even in his late 70s, Neil had been performing with an energy that made time irrelevant. Letting go of the stage wasn't easy. At first, he refused to accept what was happening. In a 2013 interview, Neil confessed that he spent nearly 2 years in denial. When his doctor told him the diagnosis, he simply said, "I'll see you whenever you want to see me, but I have work to do." He buried himself in his Los Angeles studio, surrounded by awards and memories, reminders of a lifetime of triumphs. But deep down, a quiet battle raged. For years, he wrestled with acceptance, trying to reconcile the man he was with the limits of his illness. Then, in 2023, something shifted. After 5 long years, Neil finally felt at peace. He said, "Things have gotten very quiet. I find that I like myself better. I'm easier on people. I'm easier on myself." It had taken a lifetime of applause and one devastating diagnosis for Neil Diamond to finally find calm in the silence. He wasn't just watching his life unfold on stage, he was confronting his own reflection. In December 2022, a Broadway show about Neil Diamond's life, A Beautiful Noise, opened in New York. But this wasn't your typical feel-good musical. It was raw, honest, and unfiltered, a portrait of a man who had known fame, loneliness, and heartbreak all too well. The story unfolded like therapy sessions, with each song unlocking memories Neil had tucked away for years. Sitting in the audience, he admitted, was one of the hardest things he'd ever done.
He felt embarrassed, flattered, and scared. When asked what scared him most, he didn't hesitate. Being found out. Because we all wear a facade, and the truth is, I'm not some big star. I'm just me. But even in retirement, Neil couldn't stay away from the magic of live music for long. On opening night, without warning, he appeared in the balcony and began singing Sweet Caroline. The crowd roared, the walls trembled, and for a few minutes, Broadway turned into a stadium of love. It was his first New York performance since 2017, a moment fans would never forget. And it wasn't his only surprise. In 2022, he stepped onto the field at Fenway Park in Boston to lead baseball fans in their beloved anthem, Sweet Caroline, once more. He'd also sung at a Las Vegas charity event, and during the dark early days of the pandemic, he even recorded a special hand-washing version of Sweet Caroline to bring a little light to the world. Even when life tried to silence him, Neil Diamond kept singing, and the world kept singing right back.